Yeah, George. George, how you doing, mate? Yeah. Yeah, what do you mean? What do you mean, don't tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories? Listen, mate, I'm sorry, but it's not conspiracy theory anymore, it's conspiracy fact. It's been an amazing conference so far, and as Dave said, what we're going to try and do over the next session is really join some of the dots together. And as is always the case at these conferences, it's amazing how the dots do join together, because I have no idea what the other speakers are going to talk about. And then, as you saw, I do sort of tweak my presentation a bit to try and take into account some of the previous speakers. That's why it's great to talk first, because then you don't have to give a shit. And I love it when people try and dismiss me or anybody as a conspiracy theorist, because actually it's a tremendous compliment. Because what they're actually saying is, we haven't done the research, we don't know, and actually it's much more comfortable for us not to know, so please don't tell us. But the time is coming when people have to know. They have to make a conscious decision, and one of the things that I'm going to promise you after my presentation is that you have to make a decision. One way or another, you're going to have to make a decision. And I asked Dave if he'd bring a bucket of sand outside so that for those of you who feel that that's the decision, you can go do it. But we need to take a look at the evidence, because these guys, and I'm going to use the term the away team, because it's a game, but these guys, they put the stuff out there. There's nothing really that is not available to us if we do but look for it. And we've heard a couple of references to global warming during the past couple of days or so. Anybody here think global warming, anthropogenic global warming, man-made global warming is really the case? Oh shit. Bunch of bloody conspiracy theorists. So, global warming is not my specialist subject. I'm not an environmentalist. I'm ex-oil industry. But, when peak oil started to be mooted back about almost 10 years ago, I knew immediately that this was a complete crock. And I wondered where it was going to go. I knew it was something that probably had some legs. And I don't know if I'm going to have time to do it today, but I can actually name the 4 players who have perpetuated the peak oil myth. What I will do during the course of this presentation is show you how they're benefiting from that. But the evidence is there, we do have to look for it. And with climate change, I wanted to see how far back I could go and find references to climate change. Now, I'm sure this is not the earliest. I'm sure there's more out there and I should keep looking. But let me read you something from a report that actually hit the public domain in 1967. And it's from a meeting that actually took place in 1963. And the report is incredibly titled. It's a report from Iron Mountain, so you can Google this, you can download it. On the possibility and desirability of peace. Well, those guys who believe that they are the rightful rulers of a global fiefdom believe that one way or another, mankind has to have something that he's shit scared of. And generally that's war. But in the absence of war, they need something else. And this report looks at a number of other possibilities. But let me just read you this. Credibility, in fact, lies at the heart of the problem of developing a political substitute for war. The most ambitious and unrealistic space project cannot of itself generate a believable external menace. It has been hotly argued that such a menace would offer the last best hope of peace. That's the threat of an alien invasion they're talking about here. By uniting mankind against the danger of destruction by creatures from other planets from outer space. They go on. Nevertheless, an effective political substitute for war would require alternate enemies, some of which might seem equally far-fetched in the context of the current war system. It may be, for instance, that gross pollution of the environment can eventually replace the possibility of mass destruction by nuclear weapons as the principal apparent threat to the survival of the species. Poisoning of the air and of the principal sources of food and the water supply is already well advanced. 1967. And at first glance would seem promising in this respect. It constitutes a threat that can be dealt with only through social organisation and political power. But from present indications, it will be a generation to a generation and a half before environmental pollution, however severe, will be sufficiently menacing on a global scale to offer a possible political basis for solution. So, basically, not to put too fine a point on it, the environmentalists and the ecologists have just taken the bait. And these guys are just going, thank you. You know, they put the stuff out there, and they don't expect anybody really to go looking for it. Probably one of the most significant pieces of information that's available to everybody is in this document. The Project for a New American Century is an extreme right-wing think tank. And in September 2000, they published a report called Rebuilding America's Defenses. And this is the blueprint for everything that's occurring. I mean, it shouldn't be any surprise to anybody. I mean, when you pick up this report, you'd actually think it was written by, well, George Orwell on acid. I mean, it's just outrageous. I mean, it makes 1984 look like kindergarten stuff. And when you look at the way they talk about, you know, the need for the US to take global control by any means possible, to take control of cyberspace, to take control of space, to use pharmaceuticals, to develop geno-targeted weapons, DNA-targeted weapons, you'd think, Jesus Christ, this is written by a bunch of psychopaths. And then when you turn to the back page and see all the signatories, you realise that's exactly what it is. It's written by a bunch of people. 27 of them had the courage to at least put their names to it. Well, I assume they did, and somebody didn't just take their names. But these guys, ostensibly they are American, but they are not American. They are transnationals. Most of them actually have two passports. One American, one Israeli. We'll touch more on that a bit later on. But these are transnationals. They are globalists. Their agenda is global. And in this report, published in September 2000, there's a very, very telling paragraph on page 51, which talks about how the American government, the administration, the neocon administration, is actually going to get the support of the American people to support this global agenda. Because they know that the American people don't really have a stomach for war. I mean, war's not a natural aspect of humanity. You know, one of the things that I've learned working in the oil industry for 20 years, and I've worked with many, many nationalities all around the globe, and one thing I absolutely know for certain, from personal experience, is that mankind is fundamentally compassionate and cooperative. And we respect each other's cultural differences, we respect each other's different, belief systems, but when we come together, we unite in cooperation. But the guys that are putting this together and managing the global agenda right now are not human as we would define humanity. They believe that the human race is a slave race there to serve their agenda. And in this document, published in September 2000, on page 51, they said, further the process of transformation, i.e. getting America on the road to global hegemony, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic event, like a new Pearl Harbor. And of course, a year later, that's exactly what they got. A contrived event. Is there anybody in the room who still believes the conspiracy theory that 19 Arabs hijacked 4 planes, flew 2 of them into the World Trade Center Twin Towers, 1 of them into the Pentagon, 1 of them, the passengers apparently took over and it crashed in Shanksville. And of course, apparently, somehow, they remarkably were able to demolish a 3rd tower without hitting it. World Trade Center 7 collapsing at 5:20 in the afternoon of 9/11. But this was the defining moment of the 21st century. It's defined the agenda to date. It's created the vehicle to persuade the American people of the legitimacy of launching 2 illegal wars. The vast majority of the people in America still believe that Saddam Hussein was behind the 9/11 attacks. I mean, this is just completely outrageous, but that's the power of the media. But take a look at this. This is the Tower Tarot card. Anybody recognize the similarity between what's depicted on the Tower Tarot card and the events of 9/11? It's remarkable. Was it by accident? Was it by design? Was it divine intervention? I mean, look at it, the top, the crown toppling over, which is exactly what happened when the first tower collapsed, less than an hour after being hit by a plane. We have the bolt of flame coming out of the tower, we have the people falling, and even the pile of rubble that was left bears remarkable reminiscence to the pile that was left at the bottom. Now this is very, very significant. It's very, very interesting, because I'm not a specialist in the tarot, but what I discovered was that the tarot tower card, the 16th card of the major arcana, if you draw this card, it probably indicates that you're going to go through a very, very significant change in your life. You know, basically, your whole world is going to be ripped from under you. It's the sort of card that you might draw just as you're about to go through what in the West we call the midlife crisis. You know, where everything's going to fall apart around you. Well, consider the possibility that on that day in 9/11, the planet, humanity, was dealt the Tower card. And it has fundamentally changed everything we thought we knew. And there's a number of possibilities here. One of the possibilities, obviously, is the version of events that's being presented by the mainstream media and those who control the mainstream media. And another one is an agenda that maybe we can explore for ourselves. And another one is perhaps something completely hidden. The occult agenda. Good afternoon, come in. Let me introduce you to this guy. This is a guy called Philip Zelikow. Now, Philip Zelikow is a Harvard graduate, and his speciality when he studied at Harvard is social conditioning. Social conditioning. It would be naive to believe that all the way through history there haven't been people who have seen it as their role to effectively manage humanity, to manage the human race. And let me quote you from this guy's thesis. Because in his thesis he says, contemporary history is defined functionally by those critical people and events that go into forming the public's presumptions about its immediate past. The idea of public presumption is akin to the notion of public myth, but without the negative connotation of the word myth. Such presumptions are beliefs thought to be true, although not necessarily known to be true with any real certainty, and shared with the relevant political community. This is how shit like global warming is managed. It's plausible. And they know that the vast majority of people don't know. So all they've got to do is get a few scientists on board, get them to doctor their reports, or certainly not argue too much with the politicised version of the report, which is effectively what occurred with the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, and then put it out as de facto science. It is not true. It is not true that all scientists agree on the politicised version of the IPCC. And this is a classic example of what this guy's talking about. Now, Philip Zelikow was given a very, very important role. And his role, because he was a specialist in social engineering, was to produce the 9/11 Commission report, establishing the public myth. This is the document that Dr. David Ray Griffin has described as a 571-page lie. And in his book, The 9/11 Commission Report, Omissions and Distortions, he deconstructs the 9/11 Commission report and demonstrates, basically that it's a complete crock. And if anybody has actually read the government narrative of the events that supposedly occurred on July 7th, 2005, you'd see it's exactly the same. Now, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, an extreme right-wing think tank called the Club of Rome were tasked with finding a new enemy for basically the West, because we no longer had the Cold War, we could no longer demonize those pesky Russians. And you know what? These guys couldn't even be original. because I found this phrase in their report. It says, in searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. And what have we got going on right now? Water, all that, exactly. You know, they're telling us, we have to look for it, but we're telling us, and we should be saying, you know, give us a break. You know, we're just not going to take this bullshit anymore. But, you know, the vast majority of people are just going to buy it hook, line and sinker, because these guys, their agenda is to create the chaos so they can bring order to that chaos. They create the problem and then, of course, provide the solution. Except that, you know, perhaps we have an opportunity to get ahead of the game. And it is a game. You know, and it's important we treat it as a game. It's a very challenging game. You know, and you only improve your skill in the game if you play against people that are better than you, or teams that are better than your team. And these guys are good. They're very, very, very good, because as you're going to see, they've had a lot of practice. But you know, we have an opportunity here to raise our game to meet them head on. Now, this is a very interesting game. It's like playing sort of three-dimensional American football. Now imagine that situation, you know, and this is what occurs when you suddenly realise what's going on. Imagine, you know, how many here know the rules of American gridiron football? Okay, good. That makes none of us. But so imagine a situation where all of a sudden you find yourself slap bang in the middle of the pitch, and there's these two teams of 600-pound gorillas charging towards you. You're going to go, oh, fuck! What the hell? Get me out. Because you have no idea of the rules. So perhaps you sort of dodge out the way for a while, and then you dodge this way, sort of trying to keep out the way of, you know, the linebacker and everybody else that's chasing you, and the tight end and all that crap. And then eventually, after a while, you begin to realise what's perhaps occurring, and you can start to put your toe in the water. And then maybe somebody passes the ball to you, and you go, oh. And then as time goes on, you start to understand the game, and you appreciate the rules of the game. And when you appreciate the rules of the game, guess what? You actually might enjoy it. Now, perhaps hopefully not too much. But this is the analogy, you know? And that's why when people first see through the veil, and their natural reaction is to go, no, I don't want to go there, I don't want to go there. Because it is frightening. But we have to persist. You know, we have to take a look, join the dots, see the bigger picture, and then put the toe in the water, and then maybe start to play the game. And of course, the more of us on the team, guess what? The more chance we've got of success. They're bringing it to us as well. July the 7th. There are many, many anomalies with the events that day. There's a court case going on right now in Kingston in Surrey. And all the video footage they're showing is from the trial run, some weeks previous. They're not showing any video footage of the alleged perpetrators being in London that day. And do you remember, you may not remember this, but some weeks ago the Metropolitan Police, all the police from all around the country, decided to protest in London at the paltry rise in pay that they'd been offered. And cast your mind back, because the pictures in the press the following day had all the police walking, you know, in their march, and all wearing plain white baseball caps with long peaks. Why do you think they were doing that? Well, they were doing that because all the cameras around London are there to not only do the congestion charge, they're there to spot and track people. I was having dinner last year in London, and it was a beautiful evening. I was sitting outside, and up on the corners, near an intersection, up on the corners of the buildings, was all these cameras facing every direction. I mean, there had to have been sort of 30, 40 cameras, you know, in this area. Anyway, after we finished dinner and we got up to walk away, a policeman actually walked along, and I said, "Excuse me, officer." I said, "I'm not from London." I said, "But, you know, can you tell me what all these cameras are for?" He said, "Yeah, it's for the congestion charge." I said, "What?" I said, "We're in a pedestrian precinct." Since 2002, the Metropolitan Police have had access to facial recognition software. That's how they're able to track these guys on their alleged dummy run some days before the events of 7/7, but they're not able, apparently, to come up with the same product on the day. But the perpetrators are starting to get very cocky, and they're leaving their calling card. And they certainly did that on 7/7. Take another look at this bus. Look at that on the side of the bus. Outright terror, bold and brilliant. You know, they're telling us. They're saying, you know what, guys? We know there's some of you out there who know what we're doing. It might be a few hundred, it might be a few thousand, but it's not enough. You know, you're just going to be dismissed as the conspiracy theorists. We can do this shit with absolute impunity. And I can guarantee, you know, more and more people now are starting to look at any event that occurs, and I can guarantee we can find their calling cards. And, you know, people have referred, or certainly the politicians have referred, to 7/7 being London's 9/11, where they may be more right than they know, in another way, in an occult way, because the Tower Tarot card is the 16th card in the major arcana. So when you apply the numerology to that, it's 7. So what you've actually got is 7/7. So 7/7 was London's 9/11. And now we saw Gordon Brown. I mean, I hope to God that he loses this bill in Parliament. But he's now trying to increase the number of days that people can be detained without charge for 42 days. Bear in mind, only a few years ago it was 2. And it had been 2 for, you know, 3 or 4 centuries. But on the back of 9/11, and, you know, it gets increased. Tony Blair wanted to increase it to 96. Of course, he knew it would never be increased to 96. But he got it to 28. Now Gordon Brown wants it to go to 42. And the police are saying, what? Why? We don't need this. Perhaps there's another reason they need to do that. This is the symbol, the New World Order. It's a very, very significant symbol. The separated capstone represents the knowledge retained by the few. It's a knowledge that is not to be shared with the masses. So the belief system of the masses is very, very different from the belief system of the few. And what I'm going to introduce you to today, unless you've seen me talk before, what I'm going to introduce you to today is the belief system of the few and where they're heading and why. And you can see some of the stuff that's going on here. You know, we are in the Soviet state of Great Britain. We have more cameras in this country than in the rest of the Western world put together. We are the most surveilled state on the planet. I mean, what is this all about? You know, it's about keeping track. And the facial recognition software is being perfected. It's going out to other police forces. You know, you've got cameras on the road, cameras down the streets, cameras in pedestrian precincts. I mean, I live in the country. I'm waiting until I get to the end of my footpath and I find a bloody camera, so looking down the footpath. It's coming. It's absolutely coming. Unless we stop it. The EU, of course, Gordon, you know, signs away British sovereignty. I mean, he has committed an act of treason. He has signed away British sovereignty without the permission of the British public. I mean, people say it's the end of democracy. Well, it's not the end of democracy because we never had a democracy in the first place. I mean, you know, you cannot say three-line whip and democracy in the same breath. And do you know the latest technique for manipulating the vote? Postal votes. Postal votes. How do you think that Tony Blair's majority in the last election actually increased when he was at the height of his unpopularity? Postal votes. God, I didn't realise that many people were away from Sedgefield. And Jack Straw's another one, postal votes. They manipulated the vote for Jack Straw as well. And the bottom line is that, you know, the people that get into power, it's exactly the Kissinger regime. Kissinger in 1973, after the Chilean public had elected Salvador Allende, said, this is outrageous. This is far too important for the people to decide. And so, of course, Kissinger instigated the CIA-backed coup that put Pinochet into power in Chile. And you're seeing the signs, you know, all around. I mean, the literal attempt to bring immigrants into this country, to literally break up the British culture. And we see it with the military. You know, we see all the regiments with 200-300 years of history being disbanded in the British military and now being called the Rifles. Well, this is the next step in the process until you have an EU army. And the whole point of having an EU army is that so when there is civil unrest in any particular country, you can put troops on the street that don't speak the same language as the people that are causing the unrest. It's all happening. It's not too late to stop it. This is in the Daily Mail last year. The robo-warrior. I mean, this is how dehumanized the police and the military will become. In the Project for New American Century report, they talk about using pharmaceuticals to increase the capabilities of the military by reducing their requirement for sleep, by literally reducing fear, by reducing the requirement on logistics like food and water. It's no surprise that the American military are creating atrocities because they've had the humanity drugged out of them. But there was a lighter side to this, because under that report, it said, heaven is in Devon for the great escapist. So I'm all right, Jack. There you go, even the Sun. And this is Rupert Murdoch basically taking the piss. You know, the Sun is allegedly read. I use the term read loosely, of course. But the Sun is allegedly read by 13 million people in this country. How many get beyond page 3? I don't really know. But basically, this is what Murdoch had to say on the Sun. Never have so few decided to so much for so many. And Trevor Kavanagh as well, who's the political editor of the Sun, basically ran an article that said, wake up, you're sleepwalking into an EU state. But he knew damn well that nobody would actually respond to that. They just want to test how dumbed down everybody really is. Gordon Brown is never going to win an election. I made that observation 2 years ago. It's recorded on one of my DVDs. I still stand by that. Have you seen how haggard this guy looks? Because this guy has come to realize how little power the Prime Minister really has. You know, this morning we had a look at the Zapruder film. Bill Hicks, the American comedian, used to tell a story, and he said, I have this vision. Every time a new American president is elected, he's taken, after he's sworn in on the White House lawn, he's taken down into a room in the basement of the White House, and he's shown the film, the real film, of what occurred at Dealey Plaza that day. And then they let it sink in, and they say, now, Mr. President, any questions? Well, I think Gordon's begun to realise that, he's just a mere puppet. And of course, the Tony Blair ego was so enormous that Tony Blair could never bring himself to acknowledge that he was just a puppet, so he would always present it as it's my decision, whatever his paymasters used to tell him to do. Gordon is from slightly different stock, and he's finding it very, very hard. So consequently, he won't win the next election. Princess Dave is being groomed to take his place. The New World Order, it's a phrase that, we band around a lot. What does it mean? Well, there's not one organisation that represents the New World Order. It's a very, very complex web. And it even goes into those organisations that you might think are actually countering their agenda. It's called controlled opposition. The Georgia Guidestones mysteriously appeared some 25 years ago now. They're accredited to somebody called R.C. Christian, whoever that might be, R.C. Christian, Rosicrucian, whatever. But on these Guidestones, it actually states the agenda of the New World Order. And the key one is maintain humanity under 500 million people in perpetual balance with nature. Now, 500 million is 1 or 2 short of where we're at right now, because we're at about 6.5 billion. So effectively, what they're advocating is that the population is reduced by effectively about 85%. It says, guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. I mean, this is straight out of the Hitler agenda. It's straight out of eugenics. But the Nazi Party was fundamentally financed from the US and from the pharmaceutical industry. This guy, Dr. Eric Pianka, what a specimen. Professor of zoology. He gave a lecture at the University of Texas almost exactly 2 years ago. And during the course of that lecture, he advocated that the population on the planet be reduced to 1 billion people, so generous. Guidestone says 500 million. He says, well, I think we can double that. But what's his methodology? He says we need to release the airborne Ebola virus. I mean, give me a break. Give me a break. And this guy got a standing ovation. There are a lot of sick mothers out there. I don't mean sick mothers. Okay. So I lived in the US for rather too long. Today will be good? Here we go. The media is controlled ostensibly by about half a dozen people. What people believe, what they think is controlled by the media. You know, the TVs in my house don't work. Well, that's what the kids think anyway. And the only reason I buy the newspapers is to find out what bullshit is being fed to the masses today. But the reality is those people who don't read newspapers and they don't watch television know a damn sight more than those who do. Because when you read it, you're taking it in. I mean, it actually takes a lot of discipline to dismiss it and say that's just received wisdom. That's not what I think. That's received wisdom. I mean, it's absolutely the case. I mean, in the US, it is outrageous. It is completely outrageous. And, you know, many families in the US, including my relatives, my wife's from Texas, they have the TV on from the time they get up in the morning to the time they go to bed at night. There's one in the kitchen, there's one in the living room. And, you know, when I go to stay with my relatives, and it's really tough duty because they all think George Bush is doing a good job. Oh, man, I tell you. Anyway, I literally, if somebody's talking to me, I have to go and sit next to them because I'm not used to dealing with this background noise. So when people talk to me across the room, I can't hear what they're saying. But, you know, this stuff is going in subliminally the whole day. And it's crap. But, you know, we're not much better either, are we? There you go. I mean, the smartest thing you do is get rid of it completely. Get it out your house. And when they come round, questions later, tomorrow. When they come round, you just tell them, I don't have TV, or if I have a TV, I'm only using it for DVD or for video or whatever. But you don't watch the TV. And believe you me, the soaps, look at the agenda of the soaps. In EastEnders, everybody's aggressive. They're at each other's throat all the time. You know? Of course they do. The other control is debt. And it starts with the students. This government says that more young people have had the opportunity to go to college under our government than any other previous administration. Well, fundamentally, that's not a lie. But the purpose of getting them to go to college was to get them into debt. And what do? They go and study bullshit degrees that mean nothing, that they're never going to be able to use, but they're in debt. It's brilliant. And then, of course, you know, over the last few years, you know, we've had the phenomenal ramp up in house prices. I mean, 2 years ago I was saying, guys, if you are thinking of moving any time in the next sort of 7 years, sell your house now. It's all right if you're there for the long term, it doesn't matter. But if you're looking at the short term, the market had to crash. You can't keep pumping fiat money into the marketplace and expect it to continue. And of course it's happened. You know, and I mean, what did I see? That, you know, an average of 4 families are going into bankruptcy every day in this country now. It's deliberate. It's another attempt to wipe out, effectively, the middle classes. Exactly like Hitler did in 1930s. I mean, get yourself out of debt. Do whatever it takes. Get yourself out of debt. The other side to that is debt's only a problem if you let it be. So if you have the capability to completely ignore the debt psychologically, then that's fine too. But if like most people, you know, you feel the pressure of being in debt, get out of it. And my daughter, she graduated a few years ago, and she wanted to go traveling. She wanted to take a year out of work and go traveling again. And she said, but Dad, you know, what about my debt? I said, don't worry, it'll still be there when you come back. I mean, if you've got credit cards, cut them up. Sorry. Oh, that was close. I might have needed my credit card there. Cut them up, get rid of them. You know, don't feed the system. Don't feed the system. Work in cash, you know, as much as possible. And don't use these loyalty cards. You know, it's all geared towards trying to create a social conditioning where they monitor behavior, they've got the information going into the database. Yeah. Just think about what's occurring. As Dave touched on, I mean, for the last 9 months now, I've focused very much on Codex Alimentarius. This is a big, big, big part of their agenda. You know, basically, the food that most of us are eating is shite. Do you know what? The farmers in this country feed their animals better than we feed ourselves. Because livestock is expensive. And you have to look after it. People need to be sick. Because people are a revenue stream for the pharmaceutical companies. So what's happening is going through this very, very vicious cycle. That's starting with, well, first of all, it's a Club of Rome committee, let me tell you that. But it's GM crops. All of the nutritional value is being sucked out of crops. You know, the minerals are being sucked out, the nutrients are being sucked out. Basically, you might as well eat cardboard. In fact, in some cases, cardboard will be more nutritional, but that's another stuff. And look at what's happening in Iraq. I mean, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago now, the US government forced the new government of Iraq to sign legislation making it illegal for the Iraqi farmers, where civilization started, making it illegal for Iraqi farmers to save their seeds. They have to buy their seeds from Monsanto, and each of the Monsanto seeds they buy have the suicide gene in. And this is what is coming. How are they going to remove organic farming? Simply by removing the requirement for labelling. I mean, already organic produce that you buy in Tesco's is only slightly more organic than the shit that is declared not organic. Because what they're doing, the Codex Alimentarius Commission are forcing the EU and other trade groups around the world to basically reduce the criteria for what is classified as organic. You know, the only way something's organic is if you buy it from basically a farm that says they're an organic farm and it's still got dirt on it. Because the food is being irradiated, that's the other thing they want to do, so that any food that travels is irradiated. So basically, you're eating junk. And who's there to the rescue? The pharmaceutical companies. You know, it's a symbiotic relationship. The food companies get you ill, the pharmaceutical companies keep you ill. But in keeping you ill, they also help you live longer. You know, a few years ago, what tended to happen was people lived a pretty damn good life, very healthy life. And when they started to get ill, whenever that might be, that was pretty much the sign that, you know, time on this mortal coil was coming to an end and their life would sort of, you know, go over very quickly. But now what happens is, you know, we inject mercury and other crap into the system for our babies, you know, 26 times or whatever it is before the age of 5. And then, you know, we're getting pills fed into them, get them on the kiddie coke. I mean, Ritalin is like cocaine. I mean, the medical profession, the medical scientists don't even really understand how this works. Because Ritalin is a stimulant, but actually in the youth it has the opposite effect. And of course, to make sure that there's a big market for Ritalin, then what you do is you encourage the food companies to put as much aspartame into the food as they possibly can, especially in food that's targeted at young children. Yeah, it's there. It's all there. The British government, by the way, spent £28 million last year on Ritalin. In America, 10% of all children of school age are prescribed Ritalin. And there was a documentary a little while ago that, fortunately, somebody recorded for me and sent to me. And in that, there was a hyperactive child. She was hyperactive, probably due to the 6 cans of Coca-Cola. Pepsi-Cola, actually. It was Pepsi-Cola. That's far worse. 6 cans of Pepsi that she was drinking, plus all the other junk that she was eating. Anyway, she was given Ritalin, and her mother in the documentary was asked how she felt about her child being on Ritalin. And she said, well, you know, she said, it makes my life a bit easier, but it's not my daughter. It completely rips the soul out of the child. And of course, the whole idea here is that Ritalin is the kindergarten for Prozac. And the best-selling drugs in the world. It's all about keeping the population dumbed down so that you can't see these guys taking the piss. Because that's exactly what they're doing. This is a book that I eventually managed to acquire after much searching, Corporate Crime in the Pharmaceutical Industry, written, ironically, in 1984 by a guy called John Braithwaite. And you know what? When I heard about this book, I thought, I've got to get this book. And as I was trying to find it, I was told that actually the pharmaceutical companies had bought up every copy of this book. And it was really difficult to get hold of a copy. And you know what? A few days later, the way these things do, I stumbled across somebody who'd got an unreturned library book. And I paid 54 quid for it. But if you try and buy one of these, they're often over 100 quid. But it's a superb analysis of the bullshit that goes on in the pharmaceutical industry. And this is 25 years ago now. And John Braithwaite couldn't understand why it was that when he interviewed the senior executives of the pharmaceutical industry, they all seemed like, you know, nice family men. But as soon as they got round the boardroom table, it was like Jekyll and Hyde. Yeah? Well, I'm sure Joseph Mengele was probably a nice guy at the dinner table. Yeah? This is what the corporate world does. You know, and I speak from personal experience. 20 years, you know, was wonderful education, but after 20 years, you know, it just wasn't resting easy with me at all. But these guys, I mean, the way it sucks you in, of course, is the rewards are enormous. And in 2002, the top 10 pharmaceutical companies in the world, their profits were greater than the profitability of the other 490 companies in the Fortune 500 put together. And the chief executive of Pfizer, his compensation package for that year was $74 million. Life's tougher. This is a different world. So for Big Pharma, I mean, there is absolutely no doubt about this. I mean, their agenda is that from the moment of conception to the moment of death, and they'll prolong it as long as they possibly can, you are a revenue stream. I love the Walter Matthau quote. Just as, I mean, he was dying. I mean, this is in his final days, because he never lost his sense of humour. And he said, you know, he said, I went to the doctor. He gave me 6 months to live. But when I told him I couldn't pay him, he gave me 6 months more. So food and pharmaceuticals are the primary reasons, primary methods by which these guys are determined to make sure that the slave race doesn't challenge their agenda. But there's other ways as well. And I'm sorry, but anybody who tells me that this is a natural phenomena is either delusional or controlled opposition. I sat in the park a few weeks ago with my young son. It was a beautiful morning, beautiful winter's morning, clear blue sky. And I was actually sort of enjoying, I mean, it's crisp air, but I was enjoying the natural sunlight. And then the planes started to come across. And I called a friend of mine, who's a photographer in Paynton. And I said, Simon, you better get your camera out and take these photographs. And within an hour, the haze was just across the sky. And of course, we didn't see natural sunlight again for 2 days. Yeah. This is the other technique. One of my friends in Totnes, he broached this subject with Anthony Steen, the sitting MP in Totnes. Now, clearly, Anthony Steen had never come across this issue before. My friend, he took all the photographs that he'd taken over the Totnes area, showed to Anthony Steen, and Anthony Steen actually went to the local paper and said, one of my constituents has raised this issue, and I'm going to ask the Ministry of Defence what this is all about. And do you know what? First of all, he didn't exactly rush back to my friend, but eventually, when my friend turned up at his surgery and pushed him on the issue, do you know what he said? He said, you know, if we were in power, then I could ask a few more questions, but actually we're not in power and it's very, very difficult to get information. And my friend said, so the bottom line is, you've been warned off. Well, I wouldn't say that, but it's very... He's an archetypal MP with his snout in the trough. The next way, of course, see what's going on right now. You're all being fed this bullshit that we've reached peak oil, that we're running out of oil. I don't have the time this afternoon to go into too much detail there. I've got a full DVD on the subject out there, Peak Oil, Myth or Reality. There is more oil on this planet than we know what to do with. One of the whole purposes of the Gulf Wars was to keep the Iraqi oil in the ground. Because there is so much oil in Iraq that when Saddam was running the show there, the concern was that Saddam, because he had so much oil, brought it onto the market and keep the price suppressed. And the US needs a high price in oil because oil is still currently just about traded in US dollars. And they need other countries to have US dollars so that they can buy US goods, arms. The US only has one product that it manufactures today in any volume, arms. Military equipment. That's why the US needs war. It needs war because that's the only industry that it's got. And the current mythology that's being put around is that America was no longer self-sufficient in oil from the mid-70s. That is just so wrong. America had all the oil it needed, but it needed to find a way to get dollars into the overseas market so that people could buy US products. So they used the excuse of the 1973 Middle East War, and Kissinger persuaded OPEC, in the guise of Sheikh Yamani of Saudi Arabia and the Shah of Persia, to raise prices by 400% and blame it on the Middle East War. And of course they said, well, okay, if that's what you want, you're our major customer, you're the one that's paying, who are we to say no? But of course they had all this money coming in, and what did they do with it? Spend it on arms. And funnily enough, the country that gets the most benefit from US overseas aid is also in the Middle East. It's Israel. Israel gets 85% of all US overseas aid. And funnily enough, over the last 25 years, the amount of money that the US has given Israel in US aid is actually completely identical to the amount of money that the US pays Saudi Arabia for its oil. So what's it doing? Maintaining the balance. It's making sure that there's equal forces there. Yeah? This is a quote from which I absolutely relate to, written by Jeremy Corsi in his book Black Gold Stranglehold. He says oil companies are making record $100 billion annual profits, not because oil is scarce, but because we believe it is. So you're paying, $1.20 or something or whatever at the pump now for a litre. And by the way, the government is absolutely desperate for you to keep buying petrol and diesel. You know why? Because 80 pence a litre is tax. I mean, all this stuff about green is, forked tongue. Don't look what I'm saying, Well, don't look what I'm doing, just listen to what I'm saying. 80 pence a litre going on tax to fund their agenda. Just look at what's happened to the oil companies' stock price over the last few years. People are making out like bandits. And people in the oil industry, of course, they're going to stay quiet. I mean, one of my ex-colleagues, he's an officer of Schlumberger today. He said, what I'm going to tell you is in the public domain because all stock trades of officers have to be reported. And last year, he made a stock trade of his stock options, and he earned more in that stock trade than he had earned in salary with the company in the last 30 years. So when I called him and I said, Mark, what's your view on peak oil? He said, yes. He said, long may it continue. He doesn't, this guy probably has more knowledge of oil-filled reservoirs in the world than almost anybody else. He knows exactly what the deal is. This is classic manipulation. It's creating artificial scarcity. So the New World Order. Let's have a look at where they are trying to go here. Their agenda is a new world, and the occult phrase they use is the quest for the New Jerusalem. And this has some incredible significance. And these guys believe that they can achieve their agenda, but they're only going to achieve it providing they can keep humanity in slave mode. The other phrase for the New Jerusalem is Zion. And you have a group of people, or groups of people around the world, who actually believe that they are directly descended from the lost tribes of Israel. And in the UK, the British Zionists believe that they are the descendants of the lost tribe of Ephraim. In the US, they believe that they are the lost tribe, or the descendants of the lost tribe of Machiavellian. And these guys are actually trying to create a situation where they will effectively be in the ascendancy in the new world, the new world order. Now, some of what I'm going to show you now, I think, is probably going to perhaps take a little bit of time to absorb. But, you know, one thing I would say is that please don't take anything I say at face value. That's not my agenda at all. All I can do is sow seeds. You know, at the end of the day, no one can tell you the truth. You have to, you know, realize the truth for yourself. So this is really just about sowing seeds and giving you some ideas of where to go in your searches. Why do you think that one of the outcomes of the current war is that the Iraqi Baghdad Museum was looted and they got special forces going out into the hinterland of Iraq, specially tasked to seek and destroy the ancient artifacts, because it might just call into question their version of religion. By the way, I mean, I've got to tell you that the manipulation is obviously working very well. We heard one of the speakers yesterday lay blame for the Kuwait oil fires at the door of Saddam. The Kuwait oil fires, and I'm not talking, this is not received wisdom, I was there. The Kuwait oil fires were started by the US Special Forces. Why? Who do you think was going to get all the money for putting them out? $7 billion paid for by the Emir of Kuwait. How do I know this? Because I was in Iraq 2 days after the end of hostilities. I was driving around the oil fields in the south of the country with a military escort, because we were looking at the logistics and how we were actually going to tackle the firefighting exercise, because this was something beyond anything that the oil industry had ever had to deal with before. And there were bodies of Iraqi soldiers around many of the wells. I mean, it was very obvious. They'd been defending the oil wells. It was the American Special Forces that had started the fires. And it took me until 2003 to get corroboration of that, when I discovered that there was a veterans organization in the US of the Special Forces, and a number of their members were acknowledging that they were part of the team that was starting those fires. History's written by the winners. So this is a campaign to completely wipe out anything that might in any way detract from the official version of religious history. And this is why. Because as we heard yesterday in one of the talks, I think it was the film clip showing Linda Moulton Howe, where she was acknowledging that within the US, because of their conversations with ETs or whatever, it was accepted that mankind was a created race. Well, funnily enough, that's exactly what is written in many, many mythologies all around the world. And more people, of course, were becoming familiar as the texts were being decoded with the Sumerian texts. And here we see, you know, the story, we see the accounts of how, you know, the Anunnaki came here and were here and basically genetically engineered what we recognize today as humanity. Genetically engineered humanity as effectively a slave race, with every intention of wiping them out. But there were two major players here, Enlil and Enki. Enki is acknowledged in the Sumerian text as being the true creator of man, with his partner Ninhursag. Enlil, on the other hand, was the guy who wanted to wipe humanity out. So we have all these flood myths all around the world where, you know, somebody was given the information to build a vehicle, an ark. In fact, in the Sumerian text, it's a submarine. It's not the animals going in 2 by 2, it's the DNA. To protect life on this planet from the coming cataclysm. So Enki, having passed on the information to Noah, or in the Sumerian myths, Upnapishtim, created an opportunity for this created race to continue. But there was something else going on as well at that time. And this is, of course, the verse or the section of the Bible that most theologians will run a mile from. Genesis chapter 6, where it says, "And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, daughters were born unto them, that the Elohim saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives, all of which they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he is also flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. And goes on, there were giants, Nephilim, in the earth in those days. And also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, that's Bible speak for shag them, and they bore children to them, and the same became mighty men, of which were men of renown. Now, interestingly, over the last sort of 190 years, many ancient texts have been returned to us, starting with the Egyptian hieroglyphs, of course, thanks to Jean-Francois Champollion, who, interestingly enough, when he was 7 years of age, told his parents that he had come here to decipher the Egyptian hieroglyphs, which was very interesting because he was 7 years of age in 1797, 2 years before the Rosetta Stone was discovered. And since he cracked the code in 1820, more and more of these ancient texts, ancient knowledge, wisdom has been returned to us, not least the Book of Enoch. And in the Book of Enoch, which is an amazing read, it's quite short actually, but and you can download this for yourself. It says, and the angels, the children of heaven, saw them, handsome and beautiful daughters, and desired them. And they were altogether 200. And they descended into Ardos, which is the summit of Mount Hermon. And they called the Mount Hermon, for they swore and bound one another by a curse. So here we have a reference to angels, shagging the human women, having children by them, 200 of them being put here by somebody, and they're being bound by a curse. And then from the book of Jared, which of course was only returned to us in 1947 with the Dead Sea Scrolls, it says, in the days of Jared, 200 watchers descended on Ardis, Mount Hermon. On this mountain, the watchers swore an oath and bound themselves to it. So what we have is 200 watchers. Now, there's a long debate as to who the watchers were, but it's very evident that the watchers were not of this earth. They were of another race, and they had obviously transcended an agreement or an arrangement or law by having relations with human women. And you can just imagine them at the court, can't you? I did not have relations with that woman. I think he said that before. So there they are. 200 of them. And they're bound here. Going back to the book of Enoch. It says, and Azazel taught men to make swords and daggers and shields and breastplates. Azazel, one of the watchers. And from now on you will not ascend into heaven for all eternity. And it has been decreed that you will be bound on earth for all the days of eternity. This is like the judge sentencing the watchers to their time. And before this you will have seen the destruction of your beloved sons, and you will not be able to enjoy them, but they will fall before you by the sword. And he, whoever he was angry with them and bound them until the time of consummation of their sin in the year of mystery. Well, now, I have to jump forward very quickly here because I'm going to share something with you that absolutely, when I discovered this, I spent another year on further research before I felt the confidence and belief to be able to make the observation I'm going to make to you. Those people who believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of this global fiefdom absolutely believe themselves to be the descendants of the Watchers. And therefore they are the rightful rulers in their minds of this planetary fiefdom. But their sentence is up in the year of mystery. Now this, of course, is somewhat cryptic, because what could the year of mystery be? Well, what I'm going to show you is that I believe that these guys have known that the year of mystery is 2012, and that they have known it for probably a few thousand years. 2012 has only been in the popular awareness since 1987. With the publication of Jose Arguelles' book, The Mayan Factor. Before that, there was only a few Mayanists who had any awareness whatsoever of the significance of the year 2012 in terms of the end of the 5,125-year Mayan long count, which of course actually comes to an end at 11/11 according to the US Naval Observatory, at 11:11 on the 21st of December 2012. So how do I make this leap of that the year of mystery is 2012? Well, I'm actually going to draw on some research from a guy called David Flynn here, because again, I mean, the remarkable synchronicities of research. I mean, Einstein and many other researchers have experienced this phenomena, that when you focus on something and you know there's a piece of the jigsaw missing, you know, you've got a whole bunch of pieces, but you know there's more. It's amazing, the more you look, the more you find. You know? It's a bit like Arnold Palmer when he was asked to sort of comment on the quality of his golf, and he said, you know, it's quite amazing. The more I practice, it's a bit like that with research. So these guys, those who believe themselves to be the rightful rulers, the different belief system in the capstone of the pyramid. Mount Hermon, remember. Mount Hermon, this is where the watchers were deposited. Now, Mount Hermon sits at a very, very interesting location on this planet. It actually sits at 33.53 degrees north of the equator and 33.53 degrees east of the 0 degree meridian. Now, when you go to Google Video, check this out, you'll find that that actually isn't correct. Because you have to take into account the adjustment that the 0 degree meridian was moved in 1886 from Paris to London. So were these guys trying to hide something? But when you make the adjustment for that move from Paris, it was called the Rose Line, Roslin, the Rose Line, to London, you come up with 33.53 degrees. Now this is a very, very interesting, and of course there is absolutely a connect between the 33 degrees and the 33 degrees in Freemasonry and of the mystery schools. The Earth is 21,600 nautical miles in circumference. And of course that's 360 degrees. So when you take the equation, you take 33.53 degrees divided by 360 multiplied by 21,600, guess what you come up with? 2,012 nautical miles. So Mount Hermon, the exact place where the watchers were deposited X number of years ago, sits at 2,012 nautical miles north of the equator and east of the 0 degree meridian. So these guys, they don't know for sure. They don't know for sure. But let me tell you right now, they are scared shitless that this might be right, and that their time in the ascendancy on this planet is coming to an end. And if another piece of the jigsaw that absolutely convinced me that I was on the right track was a couple of years ago. You remember that the Israelis launched an attack on southern Lebanon under the pretense of one of their soldiers being kidnapped. Well, I knew what was going to happen. I knew exactly. I mean, it was so predictable for me. They were going to take the land up to the Litani River and make sure they effectively controlled all the area around Mount Hermon, which today is controlled by the UN. And then, just before the ceasefire came into effect, so there was 3 days between the ceasefire being agreed and the ceasefire coming into effect. So what did they do? The Israelis ran hundreds of sorties and dropped these cluster bombs in that whole area, making that whole area around Mount Hermon completely uninhabitable. Because if anybody obviously drives over these or walks over these little bomblets, I mean, you lose a limb. So, I mean, obviously the Zionist agenda is very clearly spelled out on their flag. It's one of only 2 flags in the world that has territorial ambitions encoded into it. The other one is Southern Ireland, by the way. But the Israeli flag, you have the Star of David, which is the Zionist symbol. It's not a symbol of Judaism. It's the Zionist symbol. And the 2 blue stripes above and below represent the 2 rivers, the Euphrates and the Nile. The determination of the Zionists to re-establish Greater Israel. But of course there's a few other people who have something to say about that. But they wanted to keep that. I mean, this is a very interesting crop circle that actually appeared a few days before the Israelis launched their attack. And all the cluster bombs shown around there, quite prescient. So when Doug and Dave cut that one out, they obviously had the inside track on what was going to go down. But I think these guys have also been sending out signals. I think what they've been doing, and this is so arrogant, it's unbelievable, but I think what they've actually been doing is sending out signals as well to anybody out there watching, saying, we've decoded this, and if you think you're going to come here and end our sort of pretty comfortable life on this planet, you've got another thing coming. Because there's some interesting stuff here. I mean, not least the date on which the first nuclear explosion was set off, which adds up to 33. But when you actually take the epicenters of the two bombs that were dropped in Japan at the end of the Second World War, the first one being on Hiroshima and the second one being on Nagasaki, and when you bisect the line, guess what you come up with? 33.53 degrees. So what these guys were doing was sending out the signal, basically saying, this is the weaponry we've got. How arrogant can you get? I mean, it's completely outrageous. But, such is the way they think. And of course, what we see in the media is all the demonization again of Russia to create an excuse to put missiles all around the place and make this earth, turn this earth into a fortress, so that whoever it is that thinks they're going to come back here in 2012 and re-establish themselves or take somebody off or whatever, these guys want to give them a fight. But 2012, something is going to occur in 2012 that's very close to home. The London Olympics. So, what is going on here? Oh, let's go. What is going on here? Well, perhaps the clue. Seb Coe is a British Zionist. That's self-admitted. He is absolutely a British Zionist. And you remember when this logo that he had designed at the princely sum of £400,000 created such a big stink in the media? There was calls for the logo to be removed, withdrawn, replaced, causes epilepsy, gives me headaches, blah, blah, blah. Seb Coe said, this logo represents something we fundamentally believe in, and we will not be responding to any pressure to change it. Well, when I heard that, I thought, what the, that's the, it's a logo, but why get so emotional and defensive about it? The Olympics are going to cost this country £20 billion minimum. So if we have to spend another 400,000 on a logo, let's not get too defensive. But, there had to be something in that logo. That logo. And at first I thought, well, yeah, you can get 2012 out of it. But there was something that wasn't quite right because, I was left with that dot. You don't need that dot when you make 2012 out of that logo. And you know what? It was one of those amazing occasions when I think many, many people who were looking at this all came up with basically the same observation at roughly the same time. And there it is. This is Zion. 2012. The quest for the New Jerusalem. And what are they going to do? Because these guys, I think their strategy is they're either going to try and fight, or think they're going to fight, whoever it is that they think is going to come here and maybe take them off. Or their other strategy is going to be to say, what do you want to take us, away from this primitive planet for? Everybody here is a fucking slave. They do whatever it is we tell them to do. They've got a pretty nice life. They live in sort of reasonable houses. We let them drive around in the cars. We let them take holidays. Actually, the terms and conditions of our slavery are not too bad. So why don't you just leave us alone? Or maybe there's an alternative here, but perhaps to get that alternative, we've actually got to get off our arses and do something about it. Because these guys want to establish the New Jerusalem, and I think that the very good possibility of the way in which they're going to do that is they're going to take from the report from Iron Mountain, where you remember they said, the most ambitious and unrealistic space project cannot of itself generate a believable external menace. It has been hotly argued that such a menace would offer the last best hope of peace by uniting mankind against the danger of destruction by creatures from other planets or from outer space. Reagan made pretty much that same observation a number of times throughout his tenure. Most famous one being when he was at the UN in 1988. Again, you can download that and see the speech for yourself, where he talks about how he has this vision that mankind would immediately put all its differences to a side if there was a catastrophic or catalyzing event like an alien invasion. But you know, these guys are doing us a big favor. And in doing us that favor, it's perhaps, you know, obscure that I'm going to take this piece of Tibetan wisdom, because I think this is very, very telling at this particular juncture, because it's very easy for us to be angry and aggressive and annoyed and frustrated that these guys have taken advantage of us for so long and we haven't seen through it. But you know, the Tibetan wisdom says that the greatest contribution that anybody can make to the soul development of another is to be their enemy. And just think about that. You know, because when we're getting on with everybody and everything's tickety-boo and it's all wonderful, hey, you know, we don't even have to think. You know, I've got to tell you, you know, when I came out of the oil industry, I spent a year playing golf. It was wonderful. Funnily enough, after a year, I was a little bit bored. And then, if that wasn't enough, in the year, well, not quite, in the 8 months before 9/11, I spent 8 months researching Mayan mythology and cosmology in Central America. And my research base was a hammock strung between 2 palm trees on the beach in Belize. But what did I learn out of that? Yeah, I read a lot, but what did I learn? But now these guys are really giving us an opportunity, you know, to do something different from that which we've considered the norm. And let me go back to the tarot card, because I think this tarot card that effectively reflects what happened on 9/11 gives us a real clue. And it's buried in the tarot card right down here in the right-hand corner. Let me see if I've got another slide we can look at that. There you go. It's the Kundalini. The tarot card is drawn when you're about to go through a process of metanoia. The word that was mistranslated in the King James Version of the Bible to repentance. It does not mean repentance. The only person anybody is ever going to have to answer to in terms of their life is themselves. You have no need to be subjugated to anyone or anything else. This is the indication on the card that when this card is drawn and your world is rocked, you have an opportunity to completely reevaluate everything you thought you knew. And this is built into our DNA. It's a process that generally occurs somewhere around about the age of 40. In fact, Rudolf Steiner actually made the observation that if actually this process starts before the age of 40, it's premature. Because it's important in the first 40 years to get a full grasp of what life in the physical, secular, imperial, material realm is all about. And then you have the opportunity to reconnect with your true self and determine, you know, which way you want to go. But of course, these guys, everything about their agenda is to stop that reconnect from occurring. That's what the food junk is all about. That's what the medication is all about. That's why we have in the West, we've demonized the transpersonal process, so we call it the midlife crisis. In the indigenous peoples, they call it the midlife opportunity. And this is what we have to do. You know, we have to recognize that this process has been shut down, and we have to find a way to encourage people to go through it. You know, one of the things that I think we're going to see over the next few years is more and more people declaring themselves to be the Messiah. Right? Why? Why? Because the Kundalini process is going to happen on a much more rapid basis, and people aren't going to be able to integrate the experience properly. And so they're going to see themselves as a special one. And of course, the real challenge then is, having declared themselves as a special one, is how they then go back and tell everybody, well, actually, I wasn't that special. You know, it's a process, and it's not an overnight process. It's not a Damascus-type process, or road to Damascus-type process. You know, it's, Stuart Wilde called it the 1,000-day process. You know, because you literally have to strip away everything you had been taught. And of course, these guys have the many, many years of experience of social conditioning. And so the challenge is to step out of that conditioning. But I think, we're getting some clues that this process is happening and the chakras are being opened, and we really do have an opportunity to reconnect with our true selves. And these indications are coming at us from many, many ways. Doug and Dave provided us with a couple here. Look at the sign, the symbolism that is all around us. We are getting a lot of help. And I'm sure every one of you here can recount stories in your life where, basically, once you've stepped beyond the secular imperial material world, that you find actually things can operate slightly differently. It's very difficult to take that step aside because we've been conditioned. We have to earn the money. Not only do we have to earn the money, we have to earn more money. We have to buy more stuff. We have to get a bigger house, a bigger car. Bollocks. It's an amazing crop circle from last year. Absolutely determines indicates the transformational process of stepping through the doorway. I don't know what the hell is going to occur, in the coming time. What I do know is what I sense is that we are at a very, very significant juncture in human history. And maybe it's quite possible that, we're still writing the next chapter. Because one of the things that's very, very interesting is that remote viewers cannot see beyond 21st of December 2012. So maybe it's still being written. Maybe the way it unfolds is very much down to how we react to the challenges that we're now being faced with. And the reality is here that I'm pretty damn sure that everybody in this room, can actually in one way, shape or form relate to what I'm saying. You might think some of it's a heap of crap, but fundamentally I think you can generally relate to what I'm saying. And 4 or 5 years ago, it would have almost been unthinkable that we could have got this kind of number of people together 2 weekends on the trot, because last weekend I ran a similar event in Totnes. And here I am, again in Liverpool. If it's Sunday, it must be Liverpool. And and I know we're going to the Sunrise Festival, and there's 2 or 3 tents that are dedicated to questioning the received wisdom there. We have a tremendous opportunity to break these guys who believe that they are the rightful rulers of a global fiefdom. But there are a lot of things that we have to do, and I'm going to give you some ideas. Now, I don't think there's any great panacea here, because I think this whole process is very individual. And by the way, this isn't something that we solve by forming a society or a group. And in fact, the moment anyone says to me, "Oh yeah, Ian, that's great, will you come and join our group?" Whoa, no way. I run look at my website. I say, Ian Crane is an independent researcher. I don't take money from anybody. Well, except when they buy my stuff, but I don't take money from anybody, because that way the only person that can infiltrate me is me. And my experience in setting up and chairing the 9/11 Truth movement in this country, which fortunately, is going very well. I mean, as is always the case with any group, you've got the internal squabbles. And what I saw firsthand was how these guys actually create the internal squabbles so that groups become ineffectual. Amnesty International, Greenpeace, Oxfam, Shelter, all controlled opposition. The way forward is individual collectivism. That's us coming together because we share a common bond, we share a common sort of philosophy. We share the view that we want to go a way forward that's very different from the way these guys want us to go a way forward. And when we can work together, that's fantastic. And then we do our stuff, and then we go our separate ways. But there's some things that we absolutely have to do. Number one is we have to educate ourselves. I mean, like I say, don't regurgitate. If anybody just regurgitates what I've said, that's just lazy. In fact, that's why I deliberately try and sort of stimulate some, discrepancy, if you like, between what you believe and what I've presented. Because I know that if you agree with what I say, you're going to say, "Oh yeah, I agree with that." But then if you think, "Oh, that guy, he's talking a load of crap," Google, oh yeah, you will check far more on things that you don't agree with what I said than if you do agree. But the criteria is that you must absolutely take responsibility for educating yourselves and recognize that whatever is coming out of the media It's not that good. It's received wisdom, exactly. And watch your diet. These guys are shutting down your capability to reconnect with your true self by just literally putting crap on the shelves of supermarkets. Dr. Robert Verkerk, who's the chief executive of the Alliance for Natural Health, he's right on the front line of fighting Codex Alimentarius. And he has this amazing study from Poland. Poland's only been in the EU for a few years. How many years is it we've had the Poles over here? That's how long they've been in the EU. And before Poland came into the EU, Poland was fundamentally a localized culture. You know, produce was grown locally, it was sold locally. What didn't sell locally was taken into the regional areas. And then there were local farmers who shipped stuff into the sort of bigger food stores in the city. They joined the EU, and by the way, everybody was pretty healthy, right? In many towns, you didn't have a doctor. Even in some of the smaller cities, doctors were few and far between, and the pharmacists, who generally prescribed homeopathic remedies, took care of people's health. Since we've been in the EU, Sainsbury's, Tesco's, Asda, in like Flynn, buying up all the local food, shipping it out of Poland, ship all the irradiated crap in, and guess what's happened? Yeah, exactly. They're experiencing sickness in Poland like they've never known before, and who's there to ride to the rescue? Da-da-da-da! Big Pharma, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, you know, all the companies that are in there. I mean, this is what the EU is all about. It's what Codex Alimentarius is all about. It's corporatocracy. You know, break it. Buy foods. I mean, even the foods that you buy in Tesco's that say that they're organic, you know, go find a local small holding if you don't grow your own, which is obviously the primary opportunity. Grow your own if you can. But, you know, if you're in a situation where you're living in a city, that may be not an option. But go find a place where you can get quality food that's not irradiated, that hasn't had pesticides and herbicides and every other bloody side put on it. And when you're sick, well, don't get sick. You know, if you've got allergies or you've got things that you suffer from on a regular basis, go look at the natural options. You know, the allopathic system is, we need you to get sick, so don't do anything until you're really sick. And then you go to the doctor, you know, and then what do? They tap into a database now. You know, what's the symptoms? Okay, Prozac. There you go, Prozac. I mean, the doctors are just the front line, the desk personnel for the pharmaceutical companies. So find out, you know, get in contact with people who understand about natural health and preventative medicines. I mean, you know, I'm not exactly great on this front, but I'm very fortunate. My wife is very good, and I mean, she tells me what tea to drink and, you know, what to eat. Some of it tastes like shit, but anyway. You know, she tells me it's good for me, so I trust her. And water. You know, fluoride has been used by the Russians and the Germans to keep prison populations docile. Fluoride is used in a number of states, in their state penitentiaries, to keep the prison populations docile. I mean, all this crap about fluoride being good for the teeth. I mean, studies have shown that fluoridated water actually rots the teeth. I mean, look at some of the studies that have been done in Canada. This is about keeping the population docile. So choose your water. And I promise you that, you know, once you actually start to change your diet, you drink more water, and apparently the recommended amount of water is like half your body weight in ounces each day. But, you know, once you start to drink this, you will find that you've got more energy, you know, that you've got more interest in perhaps what's going on, as opposed to coming home and going, oh, what time's EastEnders on? Really, I mean, it's simple things. These guys know how to control the population. We need to know what to do to resist that. And last, but by no means least, and I mean, this is a classic event, and full credit to Dave for an amazing weekend. Spread the word. Yay! Yay! Last five. You know, however you do it. I mean, different people have different skills. You know, I've been trying to write a book for 7 years. I'm getting closer and closer and closer, but obviously writing a book isn't my skill. Yeah? But other people, they write the books, and that's fantastic. For other people, it's copying DVDs, or, you know, it's talking to people in your workforce. I mean, you've got to be sensitive. I'm not suggesting everybody just gets out and gets on a soapbox and starts preaching. I mean, actually, one of the most important ways in which you can spread the word is just change your lifestyle. Don't participate in bullshit discussions about EastEnders or football. Yeah? I mean, that's probably heresy around here. Good job you don't know what car I'm driving. But find a way to spread the word, find a way to share it. And if you can lead by example, if you can walk the talk, you know? I mean, I'll tell you a story. It was a few years ago, actually 2 years ago, I went over to Tunisia with my wife and kids. You know, it was a half-term break. Small hotel, small family hotel on the coast. And lovely group of people, you know, mainly Brits there, and the kids all got on great. And it was the last night there, and this guy from the East End of London, he was a lovely guy, and you know, forgive me, I'm not taking the piss when I drop into the accent, but you know, I just picture it that way. And on his last night, he said, Ian, come and have a drink with me tonight. He said, I've got something I want to ask you. So yeah, sure. So I went over and had a drink. He said, I know, my wife and I, we've been talking, and you know, we've noticed something about you the last week. I thought, oh shit. Oh. And he said, yeah, wait. I said, what is it? He said, well, you know, you don't talk bollocks. And I said, I'm sorry? He said, well, you know, you don't talk bollocks. He said, I've noticed that. You know, when we're at dinner and the conversation goes to football or to the soaps or whatever, he said, you just shut up. And he said, and you only participate in the conversation if there's actually something, you know, meaningful to say. And I said, well, I'm sorry. I'll try and watch EastEnders for next time. But I mean, I didn't, you know, make that connect. But I mean, it's, you know, just the way it goes. And I've got to say that now, you know, my wife and I, if we're invited to go to dinner somewhere, we actually think, do we really want to go? You know, because if it just means spending an evening talking crap, then we got better stuff that we can be doing. So, you know, I mean, sometimes there are hard decisions to make, but they're important decisions. I'm coming to a close now because, I mean, I do really believe that, you know, we are in an amazing time, an amazing opportunity. I have no idea what's going to occur. I have no existential commitment to the outcome of what's going to happen. And I'm very comfortable with the fact that I will probably never see the end result. That's not the deal. You know, I'm very comfortable with the philosophy that what I'm doing now is simply preparation for whatever I'm going to do at some future date. And whatever I've done in the past, it was just preparation for what I'm doing now. It's all part of a cycle, and we're just participating, you know, in that cycle. But as we have the opportunity to perhaps see things or see through things that other people don't have to see, we do have a responsibility, and that is the decision that you really have to walk away from here. You know, are you going to do something or do nothing? And that is a very, very important choice. And I want to quote from or retell a story that Greg Braden tells in his book, The Isaiah Effect, because I think this is, you know, a very, very illustrative account. Greg Braden talks about a time he went to see a Special Olympics event in near his home city. And he said, you know, there was a race. It was like the 50-yard dash, and obviously by definition, all of the participants was handicapped in one way, shape or form. Anyway, the starter set off the gun, and they all set off. But just after a couple of paces, the competitor in the middle lane tripped, fell over, and collapsed in a heap on the floor. And almost immediately, the people in the lane either side of them realised what had happened. And they stopped, turned round, and went back and picked that person up. And then the people in the next lanes suddenly realised there was nobody running on the inside of them and stopped and went back to help. And then the people in the outside lanes were just about to cross the finishing line, but they stopped and they walked back and they helped pick up the person that was on the ground. And then, he said, what happened was the most moving thing he'd ever seen, because every one of those walked towards the finishing line and they crossed the finishing line together. And that, for me, I believe, is our challenge. Our challenge is, regardless of where anybody else is at in their particular journey, our challenge is to do whatever it is we can to ensure that we all have an opportunity to cross whatever that finish line is together.